At my wife's work party, her boss challenged me and he had no idea who I was stick around because this story takes a turn nobody saw coming. And if you love watching arrogant people get humbled, hit that subscribe button because this one delivers. I was never supposed to be at that party in the first place. It was an exclusive company event meant only for employees and their carefully selected guests. Champagne flowing, rooftop views, fairy lights everywhere, the kind of setting designed to make people feel important. But my wife called me 3 hours before the event started, her voice carrying that particular sweetness she only uses when she needs something. She said they were short one person for the dinner arrangement and it would really help if I showed up. We had been going through a rough patch for the past few months. Too many late nights at the office, too many missed dinners. One night she did not come home at all and the fight that followed nearly ended everything between us. So when she asked me to come, I said yes. I shaved, put on the charcoal suit I had not worn since our anniversary last year, and drove across the city with a smile that did not quite reach my eyes. The rooftop was exactly what I expected. Loud music forcing people into uncomfortable closeness. Bartenders mixing expensive drinks. Groups of people laughing at jokes that were not funny because that is what you do at corporate events. My wife spotted me near the entrance and rushed over, relief flooding her face. She looked beautiful in a deep red dress I had bought her months ago, back when things between us still felt easy. She kissed me quickly, barely a brush of lips, then immediately started pulling me toward her colleagues. That is when I first saw him, her boss. A man in his late 40s with silver streaks in his hair, and a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He stood at the center of a small crowd, drink in hand, speaking with the confidence of someone who had never been told no in his entire life. He noticed us approaching and his eyes moved over me with obvious amusement. "So this is the famous husband," he said, stretching the word like it was some kind of private joke everyone was in on except me. I have to say I expected someone more impressive. A few people around him laughed, not genuine laughter but the nervous kind that happens when the person signing your paycheck makes a joke. My wife shifted beside me but said nothing. I extended my hand and introduced myself. He took it, squeezed harder than necessary, the way insecure men do when they want to establish dominance. Then he kept going. "I hear you work from home," he said, smirking. "Must be nice having all that free time while your wife is here putting in real hours." More laughter. Someone behind me tried to disguise their snort as a cough. I felt my wife tense, but she still did not speak up. She just stood there frozen, as if defending me had never occurred to her. I could have responded. I have never been short on words when the situation calls for them. But I chose silence instead because silence makes people uncomfortable in ways they cannot explain. I simply smiled, nodded, and said it was nice meeting him. His grin widened, clearly interpreting my restraint as weakness. Throughout the next hour he made several more comments, asked if I needed directions to the bar since I probably was not used to fancy places, wondered aloud if my wife had to explain her job to me using small words. Each joke landed with scattered laughter from people too afraid to do anything else. My wife tried to redirect conversations a few times, but her efforts were weak, half-hearted, almost apologetic. I noticed everything. The way her colleagues glanced between us. The way she laughed nervously when she should have shut him down. The way she seemed more concerned about making her boss comfortable than protecting the man she married. I did not react outwardly. I just observed and waited. Around 9:30, the company owner appeared on a small raised platform near the edge of the rooftop. He was an elegant man in his 60s, silver hair perfectly styled, wearing a black suit that spoke of old money and older connections. He clinked a glass to get everyone's attention and the crowd fell silent. "I want to take a moment tonight to acknowledge someone very special," he began, scanning the room until his eyes found me. "This man standing right there has been instrumental to everything we have achieved this year. When our company faced its darkest moment last quarter, he stepped in with not just capital but vision. He believed in us when the banks turned their backs. Without his investment and guidance, none of you would have jobs right now." Every head in the room turned toward me. The owner smiled warmly and raised his glass in my direction. "To our silent partner and lead investor, we owe him everything." The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel the exact moment when understanding hit my wife's boss. His face went pale. The drink in his hand trembled slightly. The confident smirk that had been plastered on his face all evening simply vanished, replaced by something that looked remarkably like fear. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply raised my glass in a small acknowledgement and nodded to the owner. The temperature on that rooftop seemed to drop 20 degrees. People who had laughed at his jokes minutes ago were now staring at their shoes. My wife stood absolutely still, her face cycling through shock, confusion, and something that might have been shame. Her boss cleared his throat several times, but no words came out. For a man who had spent the entire evening talking, he suddenly had nothing to say. I took my time walking back through the crowd. People parted for me now. The same associates who had snickered at the jokes were suddenly eager to shake my hand, to introduce themselves properly, to make sure I remembered their faces. That is how people work. They only respect you when they realize you have power over them. As I passed her boss, I leaned in slightly and said, "So about those real hours your team puts in, maybe we should discuss productivity metrics at the next board meeting." His face went from pale to gray. He mumbled something that might have been an apology, but I was already walking away. My wife caught up to me near the bar, her hand gripping my arm. "Why did you never tell me?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "All this time you knew and you never said anything. You just let me bring you here without any idea what was going to happen." I looked at her calmly and said, "Sometimes it is better to let people reveal who they really are before you decide how to respond." She stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. The rest of the party was a blur of handshakes and suddenly respectful conversations. Her boss avoided me entirely, disappearing to some corner where he nursed his drink alone. My wife stayed close to me, but there was a distance between us now that had nothing to do with physical space. On the drive home, she was silent for a long time. The city lights washed over her face as she stared out the window, and I could tell she was replaying everything in her mind. Finally, she spoke. "You humiliated me tonight." I kept my eyes on the road and replied evenly, "No, he humiliated you. I just stood there and let everyone see the truth." She turned to face me, tears forming in her eyes. "But you knew what would happen. You knew he would mock you, and you let it happen just so you could have your moment." I pulled into our driveway and turned off the engine before responding. "I let it happen because I needed to see something. I needed to see if my wife would defend me when she thought I was nobody. And now I have my answer." The silence between us was heavier than any argument we had ever had. She opened her mouth to say something, but I was already getting out of the car. That night I slept in the guest room, not because I was being petty, but because I needed space to think. Everything I had suspected about our marriage had been confirmed in the worst possible way. She had stood there, laughed along, let me be reduced to a joke, because in that moment her fear of her boss mattered more than her loyalty to me. The next morning I found her in the kitchen, coffee already made, breakfast on the table. She looked like she had not slept at all. Dark circles under her eyes, hair unwashed, still wearing the clothes from last night. She stood when I entered and immediately started talking. "I know I failed you. I know I should have said something. I was scared and I handled it wrong, and I am so sorry." I sat down and let her continue. She told me everything. The late nights at the office that were sometimes real and sometimes just excuses to avoid the tension at home. The drinks with colleagues where she vented about our marriage problems. The way she had slowly started to see me through their eyes instead of her own. She had never cheated, she swore, but she had betrayed me in other ways. She had let strangers become her confidants. She had complained about me to the same people who laughed at me last night. She had chosen their approval over my dignity. Hearing it hurt more than I expected. I asked her if she understood why that was worse in some ways than if she had simply been unfaithful. Physical betrayal is a single act. What she had done was a slow erosion of everything we had built. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. And then she said something that surprised me. "I am going to quit." I blinked. "What?" "I am resigning from the company, effective immediately." I started to protest, but she held up her hand. "This is not about you being an investor. This is about me realizing that I let that place turn me into someone I do not recognize. Someone who would stand by while her husband was mocked. Someone who cared more about office politics than her own marriage." I spent the next few days watching her, waiting to see if she meant it. On Friday, she asked me to accompany her to the office while she turned in her resignation. When we walked in together, the entire atmosphere shifted. People whispered. Her boss was nowhere to be seen. The colleagues who had witnessed everything at the party could not meet our eyes. She handed her letter to the HR director, returned her badge, and then did something I will never forget. She turned to face the open office, took a deep breath, and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Before I leave, I want to apologize to my husband. Last week at the company event, I stood by while he was disrespected and I said nothing. That was cowardly. He deserved better from me. And I want everyone here to know that I am choosing him over this place, over this career, over everything I thought mattered, because none of it matters without him." The office went completely silent. A few people looked uncomfortable. Others seemed genuinely moved. Her boss had apparently called in sick that day. We left together, her hand in mine, and for the first time in months I felt like I was walking beside my wife again. Rebuilding trust is not a straight line. There were more conversations, more tears, more difficult nights, but something had fundamentally changed. She stopped hiding parts of her life from me. She started checking in, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She made an effort to rebuild the connection we had lost. 3 months later, I got a call from the company owner. He told me that her former boss had been let go. Apparently, his behavior at the party was not an isolated incident. Multiple complaints had surfaced after that night, as if my public unmasking had given others permission to speak up about their own experiences with him. I did not feel satisfaction exactly. More like a quiet recognition that actions have consequences, even if those consequences take time to arrive. My wife started a new job at a smaller company, one where she set clear boundaries from day one. She came home at reasonable hours. She told me about her coworkers, her projects, her frustrations and victories. She invited me to their events not as an afterthought but as her partner, introducing me with pride instead of apology. Sometimes I still think about that rooftop party. The fairy lights and the champagne and the moment when everyone realized I was not who they assumed. It could have been about revenge. It could have been about humiliating the man who had tried to humiliate me. But in the end it became something more important. It became the night my marriage almost ended and the night it started to heal. Because the real lesson was never about her boss. He was just a symptom. The real lesson was about what happens when you stop fighting for the people you love. My wife had stopped fighting for me somewhere along the way. She got caught up in her career, in impressing people who did not matter, in becoming someone she thought she needed to be. And I had stopped fighting too. I had retreated into silence and observation instead of demanding the respect I deserved. That party forced both of us to confront what we had become. And in the wreckage of that confrontation we found a reason to start over. Now when we go to events together she introduces me first. She stands next to me instead of drifting away into work conversations. She notices when someone makes a comment that crosses a line and she shuts it down immediately. Not because she learned who I was on that rooftop, but because she finally remembered who we were supposed to be together. If you made it to the end of this story, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. Tell me what you would have done in that situation. Would you have revealed yourself immediately, or would you have waited like I did to see how people really acted when they thought you had nothing to offer? I read every comment, and I would love to hear your thoughts. If this story meant something to you, you're going to love what's coming next. Click that video right there for another story about someone who chose consequences over silence. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. I post new stories every week. Hit that bell so you never miss one. I'll see you in the next one.